Call to order the special meeting for the City Council of East Grand Forks. Tuesday, June 11th, 2019 is now 5 o'clock. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Steve Gander, Council President Mark Holstead.
Here.
Council Vice President Chad Grassel.
Here.
Council Members Clarence Vetter.
Here.
Dale Helms.
Here.
Tim Riepel.
Here.
Tim Johnson.
Here.
Mark Demers.
Present.
Does term and quorum. Number 1, consider approving the on-sale weekday and on-sale Sunday liquor sale license renewal for Mama Maria's located at 211 Demers Avenue, Suite 16, East Grand Forks, Minnesota 56721. This business is in good standing with the city. Moved by Vetter,
Second.
second by Grassel. Any questions or discussion? Mr. Helms.
Just a quick one. I'm assuming that this is the same license, they're just changing names on it? I mean, owners? Is that what they're doing?
For this license, so the last one you guys approved was actually to get the new business. It is new owners with a new business. It's the same DBA or same. They're using Mama Maria's. The last one that came before you was for a liquor license through the end of June this month, and then this will be the renewal starting July 1st till June of next year.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else have any questions? See none, roll call, please.
Grassel.
Yes.
Demers.
Yes.
Vetter.
Yes.
Helms.
Yes.
Riepel.
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Olsted.
Yes. Motion is carried. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Moved by Grassel, second by Riepel. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Meeting is adjourned. Motion. Okay. Call to order the City Council work session for Tuesday, June 11th, 2019 is now 5:01. So the clerk, please call roll.
Mayor Steve Gander, Council President Mark Holstead.
Here.
Council Vice President Chad Grassel.
Here.
Council Members Clarence Vetter.
Here.
Dale Helms.
Here.
Tim Riepel.
Here.
Tim Johnson.
Here.
Mark Demers.
Here.
Does term quorum. We're going to move on to number 2 on the list right away. Review of party wall agreement. Mr. Gordy.
Some time ago, about 20 years ago, when the Boardwalk building was built and the infill building were built, there was an agreement to come to an agreement on the use of the elevator that's in the infill building by the people in the Boardwalk. That has never, to this date, been completed. But what I have been doing, the mayor set up an original meeting with myself and himself and Danny Staus, and I had been working with Mr. Staus to come to an agreement. There are 3 areas of costs. The first area of cost is the daily cleaning, as I pointed out 2 weeks ago with regard to the Mama Mia, to the Mike's Pizza lease renewal, that the cost for that, they do the cleaning, and the cost will be $600 per month. And that cost will be split 50-50 between the 2 buildings. Second area of costs are for the annual licensing and inspection fees. Those costs will be split 50-50 according to the agreement. And the third area of costs are capital costs in case there have to be replacement of the elevator or whatever. The agreement also provides for 50-50 split on those costs. Mr. Staus has told me that he is ready and prepared to pay the first 2. The third one we're still working on, but I would need to let you know where we are on here. I have asked him to give me back some language changes, if he has language changes on that, on the agreement, so it will come back before you, but rather than, this affects our ability to sell the building as well, the infill building that we've talked about in the past. So I needed to bring you up to date on what's going on. And the blank that talks about the hours that the door will be locked are, it'll be Sunday through Thursday will be at 11 o'clock in the evening, and on Friday and Saturday it will be midnight. I talked to Sherry Arns, who is proprietor for Mike's Pizza, and that's what time she locks up. So, do you have questions?
Anybody have questions for Mr. Gordy at this time? So when the anticipation, or is this going to be finalized then, do you know?
As soon as possible. Mr. Staus has just gotten back from some medical care, and I talked with him today, and that's when we started talking even further on where we are in here.
Anybody have any questions at this time? See none, sir. Thanks for the update. Appreciate it. Move on to number 3, discussion and requirements for shovel-ready bridge project. Mr. Emery.
Thank you, Mr. President. So there's been some inquiries from council members kind of in regards to kind of a future bridge between Grand Forks, East Grand Forks, and what it would take to have a shovel-ready project. So just kind of wanted to put together some information for you guys tonight just to try to help answer that question. The biggest thing is before we can do anything is, both sides of the river are going to have to decide on a location. Once a location's been determined, then we'd have to complete our topographic and hydrographic surveys. Geotechnical exploration work would have to be completed. We'd have to complete a hydraulic analysis and scour analysis. All the necessary environmental reviews would need to be completed. All the necessary permitting, including any wetland delineations, and any reporting required there. Acquisition of any necessary right-of-ways, easements, platting, and then finally, kind of once you get through all of those steps, then probably the last step is you're going to have basically plans and specs completed, more or less sitting on the shelf ready to be bid. So right now, just, again, this is so preliminary, don't even like to throw out numbers, but was kind of asked, okay, just ballpark, what's that going to cost? And basically right now, we just based it on the MPO's consultant that's been working on the street highway plan update. So for a 32nd Avenue bridge, kind of the low profile, so it would go under in flooding situations, but they were estimating about $25.6 billion. If you're looking at the, a high bridge that would be able to remain open in a flood situation, you're at almost about 58 million. So again, right now, just to throw something out there, just to go through all of those steps to have shovel-ready project, we're looking at probably about 1.4 million, which is about 5.5% of, the estimated construction cost if you're looking at it on a percentage basis. And then, as we would work through that, we would be able to help with funding assistance, just some funding options. We may look at the bonding bill, getting our legislators on board. There was a build transportation grant program that came out probably the middle of May, I believe. That funding program does provide funding for, construction, for all of the planning, that type of stuff. I believe that one was like an 80-20 grant program. And then of course too, getting buy-in from the city of Grand Forks and the state of North Dakota. Those are probably just some of the funding mechanisms we're going to have to look at. So really at this time, again, we weren't looking for any recommendations, any approval to move ahead with anything. Again, just trying to help you guys understand, because so often we hear you need a shovel-ready project. What is that? So again, you just basically need to go through, have all of that permitting right away, plans and specs completed. So it's, there's a lot of work to get to a shovel-ready project. So I guess with that, I can just try to answer any questions you guys might have.
Better.
Thank you. So can a lot of these be worked on at the same time, or does one have to be completed before the next one can be done?
No, a lot of that can be kind of completed simultaneously. There's, some of those steps you got to get, you got to get some of your geotechnical stuff before you can do, maybe your structural foundation type design, but there's some of that stuff you can work on it simultaneously.
And is there any one of these that MPO can do through their budget?
That would be a question for Mr. Hogan, but I have a feeling majority of those are probably going to have to be, kind of completed by the engineer.
Okay. time frame, so if we came up with 1.5 million, what kind of time frame are we looking at to complete these steps?
My best guess right now, you're probably 9 months to a year, probably.
And if we approach the build funds,
Yep.
can we do that at this point?
I think the biggest thing you're gonna need, I think, before you even approach that, is you're gonna have to have a location determined.
And that's already determined because it's in our 40-year plan. I mean, that's been determined.
Maybe determined for you, but
I guess I would be pushing forward then to look at the build dollars to see if we would qualify for any of those, and just to get this process going again.
okay.
That would be my
Yeah, and I can look at it. I don't remember off the top of my head what the deadline is for that program. I know it, it's a very competitive program. I think a fair amount of work that goes into it. I don't think we want to go at it too prematurely either, but let me look into that or see what I can find out on it. And because I want to say the deadline for that program is like the middle of July, which is, not that far out there at this point too, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Norris.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, do these have to be done in the order that they're listed?
No.
So like you could do probably like 2 and 3, and maybe, you could do those for a wider scope than just 32nd or not? You could do those,
Well-
those are probably,
I mean, whether it's a
Couple-
survey or the geotechnical, I mean, if we got to start doing geotechnical work at 2, 3 locations, I mean, that costs, that cost is only going to go up, of course, so, to me, I think you almost got to do, not all of them got to be done in a certain order, but I think number 1 probably should be determined
Right.
before you do anything.
what's the shelf life of these studies once they're completed?
That's good question. Unless some building code, structural type codes would change, they should be good for, to me, and if it was something structural with the bridge, if some code changes came up, you'd have to redo them, but otherwise, as far as your roads and stuff coming to the bridge, I would think most of that would be good for many years.
I guess the question is I'm on board with trying to get as far down the road as we can, but we also could put ourselves behind, if we have to dust these off at a certain cost, now we're talking, maybe it's $2 million for, $500,000 refresher on these, if we do them 10 years early versus if it's 5 years or something like that, so that's a.
And I would, if it was
I
10
don't know
years
if
down
it's
the road and
$500,000,
codes
I'm just-
changed, you may have to do a little bit of redesign, but you're not by no means starting all over either.
Anything else?
That's it.
Mr. Helms?
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I believe that, like Mr. Emery just said, we need to get this number 1 figured out before we spend a lot of money out there, because we don't know which site or what street or whatever. I understand the 40-year plan, but if that 40-year plan we have doesn't agree with the people to the west of us, that 40-year plan means nothing. We have to get that site pinned down before we, my opinion, before we start spending money on getting any of this stuff ready. Because if we do it on 32nd like everybody wants, and all of a sudden it don't go there, how much money do we just waste there? I don't think the taxpayers would be real happy with us about that. So I think we need to get that plan. We need to get that. Maybe we need to have more meetings with our neighbors to the west and start, with, if nothing else, with the councils or whatever. And then once they come up with an idea or whatever, then you have to open it up to the people again. It's that simple. But I think we need to get that figured out first before we do anything.
Anybody else have any questions?
I
Mr.
did,
Johnson?
This whole thing was based on a 5% of the 32nd Avenue Bridge. I believe you said 1.5 million. And to be realistic, shouldn't we be thinking further down or further upstream? I don't know.
I think that's where you get,
That double in price, but the bridge will always be there. We're not losing a bridge in the flood when we need a bridge.
right.
So I don't know how we can be even thinking of 32nd, to be truthful.
Well, on that 32nd, you do have the option to go, to do the low bridge or the high bridge, depending on if you want to be open in a flood event. But, there's that trade-off, 25.6 million, or do you want to spend 58 million? Again, these are all things that got to be answered before we can move ahead with anything too, so. But again, my whole intent tonight was just to give you guys an idea of what needs to be completed to have a shovel-ready project, so.
And I appreciate you bringing those in. My opinion is, I think we need to have more conversations with the city, both counties and both states. I think that's, number one is most important. I think spending money on a wish of 32nd when we'll battle that is going to be tough. And, I mean, it's a lot of money. So I think we need to do that. I think we need to have more discussions. We need to have joint meetings with the county, bring them in, bring in the state legislators from both sides, and have that discussion, just lay it out.
And just a reminder, I've just been getting emails on this. If you are looking at going after bonding dollars, we have to do it a year in advance. So bonding dollars from the state, the deadline is actually June 14th for the 2020 bonding bill. So that is,
June 14th?
yes, this year, Friday. Yep, Friday is the deadline for the 2020 bonding bill. So they can start putting their list together and kind of get their tour together and that sort of thing. So just a reminder that we need that stuff, a year in advance of when we're going to be asking for it. So.
I think they normally like to see the shovel-ready stuff.
Yeah,
Go
we
back to that word.
definitely have to be further along in the process than we are right now to submit for
Yeah,
that.
but I just wanted to
You bet. No,
get that out there.
thank you. Anybody else have anything at this time? Appreciate it, Mr. Emery.
Thank you.
Thanks for bringing that. Number 4, request to conduct ice arena building study and feasibility report. Reed.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. I handed everybody just a quick addendum to add to the packet, just as we talk through the proposals that we received. After the meeting we had in March to discuss the ice arenas, we sent out a request for qualification, posted publicly for any firms that were interested in putting in their qualifications and a proposed fee to conduct a building study, and then ultimately prepare a feasibility report for the idea of the ice arena project that we discussed at that meeting in March. So we received 6 submissions for the request, and subsequently interviewed all 6 of them. David Murphy, myself, and Brian Larson conducted the interviews for the city. And ultimately, the 3 of us came away with wishing to recommend to all of you that we contract with JLG Architects and their team of consultants to be able to conduct that study. In the packet, you'll see their proposal was included with that, as well as a rundown of the teams that we received proposals from and the estimate for the fee, or the proposed fee to do it for each of them. JLG was the low price on the proposal as well. The addendum that I gave you is kind of a proposed timeline that we received from JLG. In order to fully follow through on the ice rink assessment side of it, we really want to make sure that we they can be in and assess that when the ice arena is in operation. So you'll see that in this timeline that it can't be 100% finalized until October when the Civic Center is back up and running with ice again. But as soon as it would be approved by the council, we'd get started right away with them on having them take some tours of the buildings and really be able to get in and get to work on the study side of it so that we can start to put together a proposal of what the project could look like if it's is something as simple as do nothing and just stock up on R22 like we'll talk about later, replace ice systems and leave the buildings as is, or potentially the final project of building a new arena like was discussed at the last meeting and transitioning the VFW arena into something else with into a multi-purpose facility. This study and feasibility report would be able to give us information and good statistical data to be able to tell us how to go about each of those. So just looking more than anything, unless anybody has any questions, Randy Lieberg is here. He's the ice arena planner for JLG Architects. If anybody has any questions on the scope of work or kind of what we're intending to do. Otherwise, we're looking for approval, hopefully at next week's meeting.
Anybody have any questions for Reed at this time? See none.
Looks good.
Appreciate it, sir. You do have something?
I do have
You
something.
do.
So, to me, this looks like an aggressive schedule. Is that just me, or is that you feel like you can get everything done by end of October? Or?
Yep. If you want to maybe have a
this one.
seat right by one of the microphones.
Yeah, this is something that we discussed at
Yeah.
length with JLG, and yeah, I'll let him speak on what he told us.
I would suggest that the schedule is realistic. If needed, it could be actually pushed a little faster than that. As we discussed in our meetings, that unlike maybe a hospital or a building that's got a lot more occupied spaces, the arenas are pretty open. They're pretty easy to get to. So I feel pretty comfortable with that schedule. And if it weren't for the fact that we wanted to wait until ice was in, we could probably get it done a little sooner.
Perfect. Thank you. It just looks aggressive to me, but if you guys say you can get it done, I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, we're pretty familiar with these building types, so
Absolutely. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Anybody else have anything at this time? I see none. Thank both of you.
Thank you.
Number 5, consider approving purchase of R22 for ice arena refrigeration. Reed.
All right, thank you again. So I called Midwest Refrigeration locally and asked them for a price on the R22 refrigerant, and I think came away with some really good news. It's actually, I think it's even lower right now than it was when we bought a stockpile of it 6-7 years ago. The price that they proposed is $12.59 a pound. That would be the delivered price on site to our arenas. Since we're not certified refrigeration technicians, we can't purchase it directly ourselves from a wholesale supplier, can't transport it, that kind of thing. So we need to work through a local contractor like a Midwest Refrigeration to be able to buy it and be able to have them deliver it to site to us. So this price that's proposed in the estimate, it's at $12.59 a pound. I asked them, just for a point of conversation to start, I asked them to put a price together for us for 2,000 pounds of it. And that price total at $12.59 a pound is $25,180. Just so we're completely clear with everybody and you're all aware, we didn't budget anything in the 2019 budget to buy refrigeration because the volatile market, we really didn't even know where to begin in what kind of number to be able to put in a budget for it. Our repairs and maintenance budget within the arenas has a little bit of room for, say, if we had a breakdown and we needed to have some refrigeration in an emergency basis, there is some room for that. So we could certainly use some of that to buy an inventory of it. But I don't think that there's enough in our repairs and maintenance budget line items to be able to buy this full quantity of 2,000 pounds. So I'd look at it more as like an unbudgeted purchase at this point. But the price that it is and where we're at right now in our inventory, we have 450 pounds in our inventory right now, which is enough to, if we had a complete refrigeration loss in the Civic Center, that would be enough to refill it completely. It's about a 450 pound capacity. The VFW arena is about a 4,000 pound capacity arena. So if we had a loss or if we needed to do an overhaul there, a leak popped up, anything like that, we'd be looking at a pretty significant loss in refrigerant. And just a reminder, about 2 years ago when I called for a price, the price of R22 was $40 a pound. So at the market, the way it goes up and down, I know in September of this last fall, Thief River Falls had a loss in one of their arenas, and at that point they were paying between $19 and $20 a pound for refrigerant. So it is at a pretty good low point right now. If we wanted to, I would call it probably an investment for us going forward. If we make a change in R22 and go to a different refrigerant down the line, we would certainly be able to resell any of our stock back to another arena that would be looking for it. We know locally that the Ralph Engelstad Arena in Grand Forks has no plans to go away from R22 in the immediate future. And they've already called and said if we decide to do anything with our arenas, they want to be able to have an opportunity to buy any of the R22 we have, because they are taking the approach of stockpiling the inventory the best they can. So just kind of leave that, I think, for conversation for all of you. I'll take your direction a little bit on how much we're comfortable, if at all, in stockpiling. That $12.59 a pound is kind of the price. If we buy 1,000 pounds or 4,000 pounds, that's the price per pound that we're going to pay from Midwest.
Anybody have any questions at this time? Mr. Helms?
Dealing in Freon like I do, I would suggest this is a pretty good deal. And R22 is going to be another one of those types of Freon that's going to be hard to get down the road. It's going to get harder and harder. And I deal in it every day, and every day the price is different. So I think we move on it. I think we do it.
Mr. Riedel?
I think even if we do a new rink, we're 3 years off.
Yeah.
So it's a good investment for us.
Anybody else have anything? See none, Reed. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, go back up to number 1, update in legislative session. Marty Seifert. Hi there. Do you wanna come up, sit down?
I sure can. Right here, okay?
Sounds good.
I'm gonna shut my cell phone off if that's okay. The drive from Warroad was a little longer than what people realize. Good. All right. Well, thank you all for having me. My name is Marty Seifert. I'm with the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. And I've got materials here, but the only ones I think I'm going to actually hand out, and I'll keep the other ones for later, are your LGA sheet. I customized this just for East Grand Forks. So you've got kind of an idea of where you are. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on this side, and I'll hand the rest.
I don't need one. You can get one.
4, 5, and then I'll hand the rest out this way. And that's double-sided. So what I'll do is just talk a little bit about what we worked on for the legislative session. I think, as many of you know, we take our orders from the board of directors at the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities level and try to carry out what orders that you guys give us. So as you know, East Grand Forks is in a unique situation where because of a formula that's been tweaked a little bit over the years, you were going backwards year after year after year after year. And the way we calculated it, it didn't matter if they put in $0 in LGA or $1 billion of LGA, East Grand Forks was always going to go backwards. I think it was 86,000 was your next scheduled reduction. And so we worked with your city administrator to get a bill drafted, worked with Senator Johnson, Representative Keel, the tax committee, had a hearing, went through the whole rigmarole. And what we ended up doing at the end was somewhat of a blunt instrument, but it worked. And what we wanted to start with was just stop the hemorrhaging, and I think that's the message you guys gave me last year, is at least don't have us go backwards, because if we go backwards 86,000 a year forever, we will not have any LGA left. So what we did is, we had some other communities that have formula anomalies like you do. War Road, where I just came from, was one of them. Detroit Lakes was another, and you know, on purpose or by accident, the chair of the tax committee represents Detroit Lakes. So it's kind of handy to say, hey, you know, if you help East Grand Forks with the grandfather clause, you help War Road, you also help Detroit Lakes. So what we did, if you look at this chart, is we put in a blunt grandfather clause, which basically says every city in Minnesota that is eligible for LGA cannot go backwards from where they are now. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be getting more money. We're going to work on that for next session and kind of work with you guys on building you in on inflation or something. But, you know, the orders I had from you guys when I came last year was at least stop the hemorrhaging. We can't go back 80 to 100,000 every year because we got to lay off people or raise the levy or whatever. So we built in a grandfather clause that included all of you guys, War Road, the whole works. And so just to show you on this chart, what would have happened had we not gotten the formula change in, the governor's bill had the full $30.5 million increase. The Senate bill on taxes had no increase on LGA, but look at how that worked under the old formula. You would have been treated exactly the same if we got all 30 million in under the governor as if the Senate if you got no money into LGA. And that's a problem that dealt with that bill that we drafted. So we built in the grandfather clause, and what the legislature did is we got the $30 million of new money, but they didn't have enough to give it to us all in the first year. And as you know, I mean, you guys are a city council, you understand how compromise works. They gave us 26 of the 30 in the first year, and we're going to get the other 4 million in the following year. So we're going to get an increase, you know, built in. But the way it worked is, you know, you guys are going to keep your LGA year to year 19 and 2020. We're going to come in and try to, you know, build in an inflationary increase or something for folks like you and War Road, Detroit Lakes, and others. But, you know, our first and foremost goal was to get you guys to not lose any money. So this is how it worked, is basically we got the increase in the final bill, which is the one on the far right. You know, that's kind of the way it works, the 26 million. The other 4 million will follow in the following year. That's not going to be a super big increase for all of the cities, but we're going to work together with some of the other communities to try to figure out how can we tweak the formula for getting you guys some new money, some increased money, but at least stopping, kind of following what last year's orders were, at least stop the hemorrhaging. If you look on the back side of that sheet on LGA, this is customized for East Grand Forks. You know, our goal has always been on local government aid to get back the overall LGA pot, to get it back where it was in 2002. In 2002, the way the distribution formula worked, you guys were at 2,384,000. You can kind of see there's some variances where it went down when we had those big budget deficits, then it kind of grew back up again. It stayed flat for a few years, and now it's been declining. Now, with the way we've worked the grandfather and the formula, you're probably going to be froze at 2,310,000 until we can figure out you know, an inflationary increase or whatever. But I at least, when I told the office group, I cannot go back to East Grand Forks and say, hey, you know, you're down another 80 to 100,000. So it was kind of a blunt instrument in the tax bill, but it worked. We got it passed through the House and Senate. The governor was fine doing that. You know, as many of you know, they don't like kind of doing grandfather clauses, but it was the easiest, simplest fix we had when we only had 3 days to get it figured out at the end. And I've been involved in enough conference reports to know that we couldn't go through a complicated formula change, and we just did the grandfather to kind of keep everybody whole. So does anyone have a question on this aspect? Because I think this was the most important issue for you guys when I came last year, is get this figured out.
Mr. Demers.
Not really a question, just more of a statement. I guess, obviously, we appreciate that not going backwards, but you've been in the legislature long enough. You know that losses are calculated lots of different ways, and there's real dollar losses and there's losses versus baseline. And I consider it still, if there's $26 million extra in the pot and we didn't move up, that's a baseline loss to me still. So not that I'm putting it on you, we clawed and scratched to get to zero real dollar loss. Now let's get into where our baseline is moving along where everybody else's is. And I think, like you said, I think we've proven that we're willing to do whatever it takes. I think made a few trips down to the cities, you know, between the mayor and city administrator and a couple council members. I think we're willing to put in the effort to get it back to where it needs to be, but we don't want to stop.
I appreciate that, and I do appreciate that. I mean, it's a long trip. Nobody appreciates it more than you guys do on how far the distance is, but I mean, people knew you were around. I mean, they knew you were there. Even we had some meetings canceled, we had bad weather, all the rest of it. But I mean, I think people realized this is a big deal and you can't go backwards. But I do agree that, you know, adjusted for inflation, you know, you guys are still kind of at a struggle level. But, I mean, I'll take this as a victory versus what, you know, leaving it the way it was and kind of sliding into Armageddon eventually. So I think it's probably step one of a two-step process. At least we got that done.
No, I want to thank you also for the work you put in and what you've done down there for us, and met with us and had the mayor come down and testify, and I appreciate it. And like Mr. Demers said, now we need to go work with you more. Yep. And we'll do what we have to do. So.
I want to thank your city administrator for, you know, helping get the bill put together and being available to us many times. Justin, our tax analyst, worked with him, you know, going through your history, what the formula anomalies were. So, you know, you're lucky to have him. We've got, you know, other administrators around the state that would, I think, really struggled with this, but he's been excellent to work with on that. I'm going to go next to this chart that I handed out, which is the outcome chart. This is kind of the marching orders that we got from the board of directors. Top issue is local government aid. We talked about that. What we did was we just laid out what the goal was, where the governor was, where the House was, where the Senate was, and kind of where we ended up at the end of the day with kind of the effort we put forward on the legislative team. The second one, the PFA, Public Facilities Authority, handles the grant money and loan money for sewer and water programs. And I think some of you knew that there were some environmental groups that filed lawsuit on last year's bonding bill. They did not want to use Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund money to be bondable. So that's money out of the Clean Water Fund, and they didn't want clean water money to be used for, you know, clean water, I guess. I hate to say it that way, but that's kind of the way it is. I disagree with what they were doing. But at the end of the day, because there was litigation on those bonds, the Department of Finance refused to sell the bonds. And so we had $59 million that was appropriated by the legislature that the Department of Finance, or Minnesota Management Budget is the new name for it, refused to sell. So when the bond sale came up, they refused to sell any of the bonds because they consider it a bond risk. The bond houses consider it too risky of a bond sale if there's litigation on the bonds. And we couldn't expedite it to the Supreme Court. And so we're sitting there with this $59 million in limbo. So there are a lot of communities in rural Minnesota need this PFA money, and it was all sitting in limbo. So we did get one of the early bills that was passed to convert the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund bonds into general obligation bonds so they could get sold. So what that does is anybody in line for sewer and water money, that unlocks that $59 million to get those communities done so the next ones on the list can get moving. And that was bonding bill number 1. Bonding bill number 2, the House, Senate, and Governor agreed to a $440 million general obligation bond bill 3 days before session adjourned. I think, as many of you know, the Constitution of Minnesota requires a 60% majority of each body to do borrowing or bonding. With only 3 days left, this is like a 4-dimensional Rubik's Cube to put this together. And they needed the House and the Senate, the Democrats and the Republicans to agree, because the minority caucuses have a say in this because there's not a super majority of each body of one party, and so they have to actually work together on the bonding bill. And they just simply didn't have enough time to put it together at the end. So there was no bonding bill except for $60 million for housing. Otherwise, they had no bonding bill for these other things, which is unfortunate because we have a lot of needs out here. So because of that, a lot of these other initiatives didn't really, make it through the process. Now, BDPI, which I believe this community has used in the past, we promoted 20 million in bonding, and while there was no bonding bill, we were able to sneak in $3 to $4 million of cash for BDPI, which is infrastructure improvements that you use for retaining or attracting new businesses, like it could be a service road, a sewer pipe, a water pipe, whatever. Child care capital grants, that was a strict bonding bill issue. The House had proposed $5 million in their last minute bonding bill, and they just couldn't get the bill put together at the end, but that's something we're going to come back and run up the flagpole. I have to assume you guys have child care challenges here, just like most of the communities I'm visiting. The bottom one, we were able to get some money to the initiative foundations for child care business development, how to deal with regulations, how to run a business. A lot of people are like, I love kids, but I don't know anything about running this. And so, we're going to try to get some money infused in that. And then the second part is child care grants for training and business development. We were able to put in some language. I had worked on this a little bit, but that 60% of the money has to go to Greater Minnesota. So there's a mandate. The Metro just sucks up this money in many cases, and so we actually were able to put language in that a supermajority of the money, even though we have a minority amount of the kids in the state, has to go to rural Minnesota. Because really in the Metro, they have the economy of scale and the ability to have functional child care centers and in-home daycare centers and so forth. We have a lot of market failure out in the rural areas where we don't have the economy of scale, or the buildings are older, or they don't know how to deal with the regulations. And so I think that was really a good accomplishment for us. We're going to try to come back for some more money next year. And then on the back page is just all transportation. As many of you know, CGMC has been very supportive of a comprehensive transportation package. Came out a little bit hefty on the governor's side. 20 cent a gallon increase was kind of viewed as a little hefty by a lot of people in the legislature. And so that did not pass. So there was not, large, you guys are considered a large city under the Constitution. Anybody over 5,000 is considered a large city. So I would guess you guys probably get 400,000 to 500,000 in street aid from the gas tax, something like that.
We get about 650,000 in state aid funds.
650, okay,
Yeah.
so I'm a little on the light side. Cities that are smaller, like your Warroads and your Roseau, if you're under 5,000, they get $0. And so we have the Small City Streets Initiative, and we have the larger cities, and we're trying to kind of pair that together so all of you get some new money. Corridors of Commerce was an interesting one because there was a proposal to eliminate the $25 million that we got lobbied in 2017. We have basically an open and standing appropriation right now for $25 million a year for Corridors of Commerce. Now, Corridors of Commerce tends to go to the rural area. It goes to these major thoroughfares like, Highway 71, 59, 2, whatever, that connects the major communities in the state. And they had proposed eliminating that, and we beat that back. So that appropriation year to year for $25 million in cash will continue to flow into the Corridors of Commerce program, because that would have been disastrous if they had canceled that. And we fought for years to get that built in. So there was a victory there, but it's kind of to your point on, just because you're not going backwards, is that a victory? But sometimes you got to play defense versus offense. Last thing I probably want to mention before I take any more questions, and I'll hand this around, our summer conference that's July 24th to 26th is in Bemidji. So instead of constantly having the summer conference in like Winona or Austin or Mankato where you guys have to drive 1,000,000 miles, it's in Bemidji this year. So we would love it if you guys could send some folks there to show the northern part of the state's got a strong voice. And on Friday at 10 a.m. is the general membership meeting where they elect officers and people can bring up, different topics. And if you think we're off on the wrong, if we're off the rails with the issues we're dealing with, you need to let us know. You can tell me now, go to the conferences, whatever. But, we try to stick to that basic bread and butter, LGA, public infrastructure, sewer, water, transportation, child care, the stuff that you guys have told us is important issues. We don't get into some of this other stuff that may be irrelevant to city issues. So we try to stick with bread and butter issues you guys bring up. With that, I'll just, stand for any questions you have. These extra brochures I have, I'll leave with your city administrator for your packets to consider, and stand for any questions you might have before I buzz off to the Warren City Council.
Anybody have any questions at this time? Mr. Helms?
I would have to tell you, thank you, and keep up the work getting more money, because you missed our early part of the meeting. We want to build a bridge. We need lots of money, so keep getting back.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. How much is the price of this bridge, could I ask?
50 million.
Depends on where it goes.
Depends on how,
25 to 60.
yeah, 25 to 60 million,
Okay.
probably, depending on how we
A
want
little bit of a range there.
Depends
Yeah.
whether it's floodable or not.
Okay.
Depending whether it's outside of the floodplain.
Okay. It's good to know.
Anybody else have anything at this time? Mr. Demers?
Thank you, Mr. President. An issue that has come onto our radar a little bit lately, and it isn't directly a city issue, but license centers we've been told that they're being reimbursed. There was some legislation that reimbursed them, but that was like for 65% of losses. It sounds like just about everybody's losing money running license centers, and I would be curious to see if the coalition is interested in looking into legislation or working with the legislature to try to bring those reimbursement rates up. I think it's something that's going to, like you said about childcare, I think it's something that disproportionately is going to affect greater Minnesota because we don't have the economies of scale. And it is something that affects our local businesses, our ability to do business. I mean, most people just think of them as, it's where you go to get your license renewed. But businesses use them every day to change their licenses and titles and all those things that the state requires that we do. And it's harder and harder for places around here that I'm hearing to maintain those facilities. So it might be something that we want to look at from a coalition standpoint, because it seems like their bargaining power isn't quite as great as what maybe the cities can bring to the table. So.
Yeah, they do have their own lobbyists. I know Hill Capital Associates is one of them. They got a $13 million appropriation. I just watched this from the side. It's not a client or anything, but they have $13 million in direct subsidy, which, as you said, it does not cover their full losses of this kind of debacle that Minlars has turned into. And then they were also able to get a $1 surcharge on transactions to try to stem the tide of red ink, but it's still not making up for everything. I mean, it's better than zero, obviously, but they're going to roll another new system out. Right. I don't know why they can't kind of just, isn't there some off-the-shelf thing? We have 49 other states that are doing this. Now, maybe I'm just dumb, but couldn't you just take it off the shelf of one of the other 49 states and figure this out?
Well, part of the thing is I think their IT department is stuck in like 1995, but that's a personal thing.
Well, I mean, this is me speaking off the record if the media is here, but there's a consultant industrial empire out there that makes a lot of money off of coming in and bamboozling the government. Right. And this consultant industrial empire comes in and says, we're going to sell you this great whiz-bang thing, when you could frankly just go over and figure it out from another state and just set it in there and do it for less than half the money. But I'm kind of old-fashioned that way.
It is an issue, and I've heard from here, and I've talked to a couple of the other places around. You're going to Warren. I know they have a license center, but I think it's probably understaffed, and it's probably doesn't meet all the requirements for the farmers out there that are changing load limits, and they scale up in the spring and they bring it down in the fall and stuff like that. So, but just an observation.
No, I'll chat with my boss about that, and it's also something maybe we talk about at the conference. I mean, even on the daycare issue, people are like, well, should we be involved in that? And it's kind of like, well, pretty much every city council we've been talking to has said this is a problem because young families are not going to move to our city if they can't find a place to take care of their kids. And that's an impact on our cities. You guys are looking out for what's best for your community. So there was a little hesitancy from some people that we should delve into this daycare issue. And, I mean, I think it's worthwhile, because, and there's a regulatory aspect to that too. It's not just all about money.
Right.
Because you can dump money into dumb ideas. So I think they're gonna have to work on both the regulatory side and the money side. I mean, I had heard from Warren last year, they had 2 ladies that wanted to start a daycare center, and I know it was an old church or Catholic or Lutheran school that wasn't being used or whatever it was. And, you know, they were told, one of you has to have a 4-year degree. And, you know, if you're 55 years old, you can go off and, you know, if you have a tech college degree, you're going to go off for another 3 years, is ludicrous. And so apparently you have to have, you know, a license to love kids these days, but, so we have to figure that out. They're figuring out in other states, we should be able to figure it out here. So, I mean, and if you guys think we shouldn't be involved in daycare, let us know. I mean, but it's like anything. We can't get involved in everything, but there are some things we just have to get involved with.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything? See none, sir? Appreciate
Okay,
it. Thanks a
off to
lot.
Warren. I'll leave this with you. Thank you much.
Thank you.
Marty, can I ask you, who is your boss?
Well, Tim Flaherty has been, well, you guys are my boss, actually. But, Bradley Peterson at Flaherty and Wood is my new boss, because Tim Flaherty, who was the founder of our firm, retired in May. And so Bradley's, he does the city reports on the other side of the state, because I live in Marshall, so it makes sense for me to be over here.
I
But
think that's a waste of money. I don't think you need a boss.
I'm just a farm kid who tries to do the right thing, so. Appreciate it. Thank you.
All righty.
Thanks, man.
Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move.
Who by?
I have one more thing.
Bud Helms.
Mr. Stordahl, I was over there and looked at the bridge before I come over here. There's 2 sides to that road. They did the south side, it looks great, but the north side still looks horrible. Still got the big clay clumps there and everything. We need to get them back and get it finished. I'm referring to where we put the dirt by the Point Bridge. All the clay clumps and everything was underneath the railing and everything. It looked horrible. They were over there today and leveled and done some hydro seeding and everything, but they only done the south side. They didn't do the north side. So we need to get them back and get that job finished. Okay, thank you.
Motion to adjourn by Grasso, is there a second? Repel, second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion is carried, means adjourned.
What are you doing, Mr. Hewitt?